Welcome to the Arena Decklist Podcast. I'm Jerry Thompson, joined by Brian Gottlieb, and I almost went with the joke that's not a very funny joke of Alchemy Decklist Podcast, but I didn't want to alarm anyone, at least not that early, you know?
I already did that for the name of our podcast last week. I don't know if you caught that.
I know, but I didn't want to open with it and then have people not hear the familiar business. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we've shown the capacity for wild, outlandish, out of nowhere changes. So I could understand fear if we were to again speak about another name change.
That one came with like a precursor announcement, though.
Yeah, we didn't announce we were changing the name of the cast, though, right? We just said we were like doing something.
Yeah.
And then everyone got real mad at us. We were kind of like wizards for a week. It was cool. People just didn't like anything we were doing.
Oh man, that sucked. Maybe I shouldn't do that.
Makes you think a little bit.
A little bit. Not much though. I mean, okay. It's basically gone at this point. I'm not even going to think about it. Anyway, Alchemy came out today.
Here
Thursday,
it is. Has arrived.
The day that we're recording. Came with a few hiccups. Brian has already encountered some bugs. It's so funny to me that I very rarely encounter these arena bugs, but for whatever reason, it's just always the cards Brian wants to play with.
Yeah, I'm playing the dumbest cards possible, and they're like, no, nope, we don't have to test this. Nobody cares about it. Well, I care. I care about these stupid cards. I actually think this card is very good. That I got hit with a bug today, Settle the Wilds, and we'll talk more about that as we go through the podcast. But yeah, whatever. It was a pretty small hiccup. Basically, like you seek a land with this card, you put it onto the battlefield, and then a phantom copy shows up in your hand, and it seems like it's there, and you should just be able to play it. Like, I'm like, where did this come from? This doesn't make a lot of sense. But then like I move on a few turns and I'm like, oh yeah, I have a land in my hand, and I just don't. My Omnath sits on the battlefield like a clown doing nothing. So yeah, it was a little tilting to have my first few games of Alchemy influenced by this bug, but this has got to be an easy one to clean up. I'm sure they'll do it pretty quickly.
I hope so. The things are weird though, all the cards are doing these weird things.
They are weird cards for sure.
So we did our show last week and talked about Alchemy a little bit, and I didn't feel that bad about it because for the most part, it seemed like a thing that you didn't really have to engage with if you didn't want to. And to some extent, that's not true because the cards that they nerf in Alchemy also get nerfed in Historic. However, I think that the people who are complaining about that are going a little over the top because for the most part, the cards that are getting nerfed in Standard are not necessarily ones that impact Historic all that much.
I don't know, man. Like, you're mostly right, with the exception of one deck, which if you are a person who bought into Historic with the expectation you would play this deck, I understand being really upset. And here's the problem is that it seems plausible to me. The deck I'm speaking about, of course, is like Epiphany and just copying it, Galvanic Iteration, same thing we're doing in Standard. That exists in Historic.
Yeah, but hold on. Like, you probably bought that deck for Standard, right?
Probably, but still, you then buy the surrounding Historic cards with the expectation you now have your Historic deck, and then all of a sudden you don't. And it's just like, it's not a big deal. You're right. It's not a big deal. It's searching for something to be really angry about, but why put people in that position where like you have to screw them over?
Regardless, I think that they should give wild cards for things that get nerfed in Historic.
Correct.
I don't understand why they're not doing that. But for people to be like, I hate Alchemy because they nerfed Goldspan Dragon or what, it's like, what?
Yeah. No, that doesn't track with me.
And for Epiphany, it's like, well, a lot of that you probably got for Standard. And then, I mean, yeah, the stuff that you got that was Historic specific is like what, the dual lands? Like those decks always just looked like Standard decks to me. I can't think of like anything specific that would be just like a Historic specific card.
Yeah, maybe in the sideboard. I would have to go look to be sure. But you're right. And if you want to hate Alchemy, I think there's plenty of other reasons to hate Alchemy. There's a lot of good arguments around like complexity creep, just being overwhelmed with formats, too many things to keep track of. Those things do matter. I understand the argument that options are good, but decision paralysis is a real thing. There's some number of options where there's a sweet spot where you don't have too many and you don't have too few. If you feel like this pushes you over the too many thing, I think that's a fine argument. And I think what's really funny is if you go back, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, the Wizards of the Coast probably would have made the exact same argument when they did things like, I don't know, remove block from being part of the thing. Like, surely block is just an option you can consider playing if you want. And it was mostly played on Magic Online. And they were just like, no, this is too many options. We're going to get rid of this. They've made these arguments before.
They literally consolidated like half the queues on Magic Online at one point.
Right. For this reason.
Yes. And I distinctly remember it was like Lee Sharp tweet explaining that like, there was just like, granted, there were situations where it was like 2 people in every queue because they had like 6 different draft queues for one set or something.
Yep.
But it was like part of that is because there was decision paralysis, right? It's like, okay, what do I want to play 8-4 or 4-3-2-2? Do I want to play in like the competitive or the casual one, which I guess was like you play all the rounds at a time, or you play like a round and your league just sits open or whatever. And then there was like the really casual queue or whatever. At some point they were just like, yeah, this is just not working for a variety of reasons. And I think right now Arena has the player base to support all of that stuff and all of those queues, but why not go with things that people already want, which is like Pioneer on Arena, for example?
It's a good question, and you'll have to forgive me. I'm going to retread something that I spoke about on my Twitter account, but I think it just applies really well to this. And it was a real moment of clarity for me. I was just thinking about like why I get so upset over stuff like this, where they really like expand far and ask players to keep track of a lot of things and don't really consider the complexity of their play offerings anymore. And I just realized that all of these things I feel strongly about in terms of making the ecosystem more uniform and shared experience and working within the restrictions you've been given to create something great and using that to inspire creativity. I was taught all of these things by Wizards of the Coast, by their design principles. They drilled these into me, and I believed in them and ingrained them into my own philosophy, not only for like the limited amount of game design work that I have done, but also just in the way I engage with every single game I play. And I think about these things all the time because Wizards did such a good job adhering to them and drilling them into me. And via articles on the Mothership and podcasts and all these things, you would hear very, very brilliant game designers talk about these important philosophies that they believed in.
Yeah, man, I worked there. I'm right there with you.
And I've watched these same people walk them back one by one. And then I'm the one who's crazy because I'm upset by it. It's just such a jarring experience.
In theory, things can change, and we're now in like more of a digital. That's
not what's happening. Like, I understand. I'm saying it's about money.
That's why I started with in theory.
Yeah.
Things you could justify, like, things are different. It's more of like a mobile and not tabletop sort of thing where it's just like, now I need like that hit of dopamine now. I'll play a game on my phone real quick while I do whatever. And I don't know. I don't think that it's necessarily accurate, but I could see how they justify that use that to justify their decisions when ultimately all they're trying to do is make money, right? And then it's like, well, if we need a way to justify doing this, like this is what we can point at and say whether or not they actually believe it. Who knows?
Right, but they don't even bother doing that, right? Like another reason you could say is like you've learned something. You had a previous understanding about how this should work, but you've explored it more, you've thought about it more, you've spent more time with it, and you realize, no, we were wrong back then, and here's why. And you lay that out. And then I can at least go, okay, that makes sense to me. I understand what you're doing. And again, like another thing I've been thinking about is just communication. I've been playing a ton of TFT lately, Teamfight Tactics, because they put out a really great set. Their latest set is just a incredible piece of like balance and just totally changes the way you play the game for a game I already really liked. I think they did a tremendous job with their latest set. And along the way, they are so communicative. The lead designer goes by Mort Dog and just puts out after every single patch, like detailed thoughts, why we did this. Here's what we did in testing. Here's what we talked about. On top of just like doing all the work, he sits there and spends hours explaining all the work and
I love that.
Yeah, it's incredible. Not only that, like there was just an article that came out a couple of days ago where it was like, they invited a reporter to sit in on their balance process. And then the reporter reported, these are the discussions they're having. Here's what they're trying to do all the time. And it was just like such a refreshing breath of fresh air compared to the basic silence we've gotten on all these decisions or, boilerplate justifications.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I can argue in favor of that, where it's like, it seemed like basically no matter what Wizard said, they would just get clowned. So I get them taking a step back, but I think rather than doing it, completely hands off, it's like maybe think about your process and how you could deliver that information in a better way. Or
here's what I would argue. They were getting clowned by clowns, like people who just wanted to do that. And that's what they were getting off on.
Yes and no, because some of it was us too. Think about anytime there's like a B&R announcement and we go over it, and maybe it's more me than you, but it's like I just look at a sentence and I'm just like, this doesn't make any sense for like XYZ,
That's influenced by a lot at this point, though. Like that's bringing a lot of baggage to the table. If I go back to things, that's definitely true. Let's go back to like a moment in time with Magic where it was like taking damage off the stack. And there was a very vocal group of people who were like, this is garbage, you've ruined the game, blah, blah, blah. I know from my perspective, I didn't even blink. Like it wasn't even something that I was like, oh, this is foolish, this is going to ruin everything. I was just like, oh, this is weird, but like, I get it and I see where we're going. Let's try it out. And it was fine. And I can't imagine damage going back on the stack now. It seems ridiculous that it ever worked that way. But still, there was a very loud, very vocal outcry. And I think that the outcries have just pushed to a broader base. And it's not just people who want to be angry. It's people with really good faith arguments about why these things are potentially damaging long-term, maybe not done in the best way possible. And it just, because there's so much of it, it sounds, I don't even know how to say the word, cacophonious. Is that correct?
I mean, yeah, it's close enough.
Close enough. Else. Okay. It's really loud and you hear a lot of noise and it becomes hard to separate reality from fiction, but still, I don't know what to say, man. Like you have to have some form of communication if you're going to get a very focused, very supportive fan base to be your biggest cheerleader, which I want to be for Wizards all the time. I really do. I don't want anything more than to say, this is great. I love this. Let's do more of it. But it's hard.
We kind of were not that long ago, like 2017 or whatever.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I think I've been on both sides, and it's not because I'm playing both sides. It's because I've felt both ways.
Yeah, same. There was definitely a time where I was like, wow, things are like trending up. This is awesome. I'm really enjoying like my life and my job. And now I'm just kind of like, should I be looking for something else,
Yes, good question.
And I don't know if I found something else that I thought was like a fraction of how good it was in 2018 or whatever, like I probably would try and pursue that, in addition to this, because I still like doing some amount of Magic stuff, but I wouldn't want to tie up like 100% of my life into it.
Sure. No, I feel you 100%.
But yeah, I mean, I've definitely been part of the problem, I feel like, as far as the reason why they are not trying to be as communicative as they have been in the past. But I also don't think I was just like, everything you do is bad. I think that I had like actual coherent arguments, which certainly not everyone on the internet does.
No, they don't. And you can't fight against that. Like you're always going to be exposed to that. And look, you're exposed to it even with like a non-communicative stance where you're not putting out all the information. So why not get more, I don't know, maybe I'm patting myself on the back too much. Why not get more learned people who understand what you're trying to accomplish and what you're trying to do, to be able to give you the support that maybe will influence some of those more easily riled up folks out there on the internet.
Yeah, that'd be great. If only we knew of some people who could be that.
Someday.
Someday. Anyway, as far as like Alchemy is concerned, I'm like kind of lukewarm on the whole thing. My take has mostly been like, you can sort of opt out of it. I think the historic stuff is like, some of the arguments being made are kind of silly, but for someone who crafted like humans and you think the Luminarch Aspirant nerf is a huge nerf to your deck and you're not getting wildcards as a result of that, that definitely sucks. They should fix that for sure. And then there's the whole like, well, what if this is like a PTQ season or whatever? It's like, Pro Magic's not a thing. Take a season off. Like,
or take all of them off.
Yeah, whatever.
You don't have to do it. There's no reason to do it. If it doesn't make you happy, I wouldn't do it right now.
And, maybe you think that like it should not be a qualifier season. Well, I mean, I kind of agree with you too. But, over the last few years, Wizards is going to do stuff like this. And especially now, it seems like a lot of the stuff is going to, not really benefit enfranchised, competitive, aspiring Magic players, right? Like, you just have to expect that stuff. And maybe that's why I'm just kind of like numb to this whole thing, where I'm just like, I don't care. This is like not as big of a deal as the last like 20 things that they've done that have hurt competitive Magic, right? So
Yep.
Whatever.
Mostly where I ended up on this is just like, I have a lot of gripes with it, but what I would rather do is focus on building some new Magic decks, which I love doing. I've had a good time already putting together new decks. I'm going to put out an article on Star City this week with a bunch of them. I'll be sure to drop some in our Discord for folks. So I think there's interesting ideas here. There's interesting cards here. And, it's not super deep, but it's only 63 cards that we're working with. And I think among those 63, there's some that are really worth exploring.
I was actually surprised at how many different avenues I could go down, because like my article had, I think, 4 deck lists, and then I built a bunch of other ones, or started to, that didn't make the final article. But there was a lot of different rabbit holes you could go down in, and a lot of that was a result of like the nerfs in addition to what came from this set, right? So it isn't just 63 cards, but also these 63 cards, you do like a first pass, you look at them, especially you look at some of the like drafting spell books, and you're just like, all these cards suck. And like vanilla 3 mana 4/3s that may or may not actually have text on them, who knows? And you're just like, are all these cards bad? But actually, like, some of them are pretty nice and pretty impactful and give support to archetypes that kind of needed it.
So you say nerfs influencing that and opening up a lot of play space. How much of it is just actually Epiphany, and how much of it is just broader nerfs giving you back play space?
I think Epiphany is definitely the biggest one, because it just opens you up to mid-range as a thing. But then also Chariot, and to a lesser extent Goldspan Dragon, also being nerfed means that you have more reasons to explore other cards and other strategies, rather than just being like, oh, well, I kind of have to start with Chariot and go from there.
No, very, very fair. You happen to catch the win rates of the Is It Epiphany deck when it was played by a bunch of really good players at the set championship?
It was high. It was like 59% or something.
Yeah, how about that? It's odd. I really didn't think the deck would have a long-term future in Magic.
Well, you see, Brian, probably a lot of people didn't test against it because they thought it was going to be bad, right?
Right. That makes sense. Yeah. And once the good players start playing against it, it won't mean anything. And then we'll finally, oh, wait, the good players were in this tournament. There's some reason why it's not good. Don't worry. It'll get sorted out.
I thought you weren't the I told you so.
This is a good faith argument. I don't know what you're talking about. This is just me watching a set championship and commenting on what I saw.
Well, oh no, I got it. Here's a good argument. Is people didn't actually care about the tournament.
Well, that is often true.
I saw like 2 people on Twitter saying that they didn't test at all. So
yeah,
that's probably why.
That I think there was more than 2 people that felt that way. A lot of those people, though, who said they didn't test, just did play Is It Epiphany and did pretty well. So I don't know.
Yeah, weird. Anyway, speaking of vanilla 3 mana 4/3s that may or may not have text, Brian, I have a card for you.
Okay, I'm excited to hear.
And I'm going to try and explain to you what this card does, because it seems like, despite reading this card 10 times, you still don't know what it does.
I do not know. Please enlighten me.
This card is called Grizzled Hauntmaster. It is 1 GG for a 4/3 creature human warrior. You with me so far?
Yes.
Okay. When this thing enters the battlefield, you may exile a creature card from your hand.
1 creature card. Yes.
Yes. Well, wait, hold on.
Okay.
If you do, search your hand right, and library for any number of cards with the same name, exile them, then shuffle. So you can exile more as long as they're the same name, right?
Okay. So I've exiled 4 things now. Let's in this theoretical world.
Yeah, from different zones, right?
Yeah.
Choose a creature card you own from outside the game. Conjure a duplicate of that card into your hand for each card exiled from your hand this way. So you can exchange a creature in your hand for one in your sideboard.
Why did I mess with those creatures that were in my deck?
Oh, because maybe one of them is like a core Firewalker or something, and you're playing against blue-white control.
So in this scenario, I've main decked a bunch of core Firewalkers. Now realized my horrible mistake. Time to switch it up, get those out.
Maybe,
but I'm only replacing that one that I exiled from my hand.
However many you exiled in your hand.
Right. So if I happen to have 2 of those cards, then
you can Living Wish for 2 things. So like maybe you draw Llanowar Elves.
Yeah.
That you're just like, oh, this is not going to do it, right?
Yeah, it's late in the game now. I've got my 3-drop online.
Yeah, I'm not sure how late in the game you had a Llanowar Elves and a Grizzled Huntmaster.
Don't worry
Whatever.
about
It doesn't matter. Yeah, who cares? Yeah, so what it's trying to do is make it so you can like thin those things out of your deck if they're bad. But this card would be so much better and so much more easily grokkable if it was just like exile a creature, get a creature from your sideboard.
I will say, just like for whatever reason, talking through it out loud, it now seems very simple to me. However, I've read this card so many times and I thought it did at least 5 different things throughout the path of me trying to understand it. And honestly, until this very moment, I was not 100% sure. I do now understand it. And like I said, having just gone through it line by line, seems pretty simple. I don't think it's going to cause any real understanding problems, but look how much text we had to get through.
Dude, this is why keywords exist, you know?
Yeah, and like what did you add to the game with this card? Like how did the game become better? And
I think if you're like, oh, you want to play best of 1 in digital only, like here's this Living Wish thing and like building a deck with this for my article, it was actually kind of cool. I get it. But then they're also trying to mix in the like, oh, what if you draw your dead cards in a certain matchup in best of 1? We're trying to fix that. And I think that just kind of like completely decimates the card. It just adds like 4 lines of text to it.
Sometimes less is more. It really is, especially when it comes to Magic. Like if I go back to what drew me into Magic, it's those resonant designs, the things that just were like simple expressions of clean ideas, and nothing about Grizzled Huntmaster is clean or simple or really expresses any kind of idea. Like I don't get why this Grizzled Huntmaster is doing this stuff really. So
yeah, like hunting your own creatures or something.
It's a weird thing to do. Why would I summon this thing if it's just going to hunt my own creatures? And then he's got all these other creatures on retainer where he just like calls them up and he's like, oh, come back to my cabin. I have a bunch of creatures there for you. And I just don't want anything to do with this guy. Seems like a creep.
I got 4 Llanowar Elves bodies for you. Now, Avenger of Zendikar or whatever, come fight for me. Like, okay, sure, whatever, man.
Yeah, I don't know what kind of market this creep is dealing in, but I just don't want anything to do with Grizzled Huntmaster. I've had enough.
Anyway, this is a warrior, and it's a relevant party creature type, and there were not a lot of very good warriors in green and white. And then I got to start exploring like a party deck that, well, if you have this thing, what would you wish for in your 7-card sideboard? It was like kind of an interesting deck building experience.
See, this is the thing though. This goes back to like, this is a lesson that I learned, and unfortunately I don't make the Magic cards, so I'm not able to apply this lesson. But having an interesting puzzle in deck building is not worth severe constraints or severe wordiness or dramatically warping the power level around that really interesting deck building. Because if you go back to Companion, that was a lot of really interesting deck building we did during the Ikoria preview season. And then it very quickly became, I hate this question, and I figured out how to answer it already, so this is never going to offer me anything again. And it has now warped the game. And this doesn't have, obviously, that kind of dramatic effect, but it's a laughably complicated card that has now become a bit of a meme. And despite having this interesting question tied to it, I don't think you got the return for this just kind of being laughed out of the room.
Yeah, I wish it didn't have the like cranial extraction yourself. And then if it was just like, discard a creature, get a creature from your sideboard, boom. Like cool. Simple design, easy, cool.
Less is more.
Yeah. And also then that could have just been a paper card. But, whatever.
Whatever indeed.
Anyway, we have a top 10. That's our 63 cards in the set, right? That's number 63.
Dishonorable mention for Grizzled Hauntmaster.
Wait, 68?
Not on. Is it 68? I thought they said 63 last week, right?
I don't know. Mythic Spoiler says there's 60. Oh, they're listing the changed cards.
Okay.
Also. I don't know.
Well, it wouldn't surprise me if it changed, because I'm 99% sure that either someone said or it's written somewhere that every single card in this set was supposed to be a rare or a mythic. And there's just 11 uncommons, 10 uncommons, 11 uncommons that exist in the set now. Great. And some of them are pretty good. So I like that. It's a nice tip of the cap to the wild cards, but that was not what was announced, I'm pretty sure. Or I'm confused.
I'm pretty sure too. I mean, it's been a long week, so whatever.
Yeah, and a lot of confusing details that I could certainly get wrong. So
anyway, we have a top 10 list. Haven't done a ton of playing with this yet. Was watching a lot of streams and like bouncing around to different people's streams to see what they were playing, just to kind of, I don't know, check my work for the stuff that I did in my article. And it looked like a lot of the stuff that I thought was like fun and wanted to build around was also pretty good. So that was good to see. And then there was some other stuff where it was like, I didn't really know where to fit this into a deck. And some other people had cracked the code. So that was cool too.
Yeah. And I also like that we lined up on a lot of stuff. A lot of the cards we were interested in, it seemed like we were both interested in. And we basically had no dispute over our number one card. We both slotted it in there right away. So it's good to see.
Yeah. Dope as hell card, by the way.
Yep. Yeah.
Anyway, number 10, a card that we have not cracked the code on, but you can kind of read over this once and think about maybe how it could potentially be busted. So this is Oglor, Devoted Assistant, which is 1/U for a 1/1 legendary creature, Homunculus. At the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top 2 cards of your library, then put one of them in your graveyard. And whenever a creature card is put into your graveyard from your library or hand, it perpetually gains. When this card leaves your graveyard, create a tapped 2/2 black zombie creature token.
Yeah, I don't think I'm blowing anyone's mind by telling you what I want to do with this card. I just want to mill myself. Then I don't know, Relic of Progenitus type stuff to exile my whole graveyard in one shot and attack with a huge amount of zombies. Like, it's a combo kill type setup that is functional on its face. I wouldn't say it's a good card on its face, but a little bit of card selection is nice. The ability of the creatures in your graveyard to persist, to, as we say now, perpetually have the ability to make these 2/2s. It's cool. It's a cool piece of combo setup. It makes it a little bit more reliable. Have not cracked the code yet. I think maybe this one deserves a bigger look in Historic than it does in the standard space, just because of the tools that are available there. You do have like Relic of Progenitus for these one-shot kills out of nowhere.
Or Scavenging Ooze, even like
Scavenging Ooze like sounds great. You have your very, very robust suite of self-mill options in that format. So I want to look at it there, but in terms of just like raw potential, you see it in this card, even if you don't have a deck list put together yet. So I'm going to work on it in Standard. I suspect, I'm going to work on it in Alchemy. I suspect it's not there yet. And I think there's a good chance it will never get there. But in terms of just raw output, this is probably the biggest potential home run in the set, I would say.
You could do stuff like Ox of Agonis too.
Sure. There's a lot of ways to move cards out of your graveyard.
I initially thought of Croxa and then was like, well, that's kind of a stretch. And Ox, like this thing fills your graveyard, and I don't know, maybe you have some Arclight Phoenix or Mana Gorger Phoenix type stuff, or just like you're doing like maybe some madnessy things. You have like Root Walls, just like random creatures, right? That you can exile with Ox and just make like 10 power pretty easily, maybe closer to 20 power, who knows?
Yeah, it's possible this doesn't have to be like an OTK type situation where you just set up a huge battlefield of zombies. Maybe there's just enough value here to play Algalor as like a little bit of a mill engine. So worth exploring for sure.
Number 9 have a card called Divine Purge, which is 1 dub sorcery. Exile all artifacts and creatures with mana value 3 or less. They perpetually gain. This spell costs 2 more to cast, and this permanent enters the battlefield tapped. For as long as each of them remains exiled, its owner may play it. And we had a pretty, I wouldn't say it was like a lengthy discussion. A lot of it was just like, oh, because of this, and we agreed or whatever, But we had to talk about how this set actually impacts standard, or standard changes into alchemy, or however you want to look at it. And so many of these cards are like, crafting random cards, giving you sources of card advantage, whatever. And it makes the game more similar to Hearthstone and a lot of the TCGs in that space, or I guess CCGs, whatever, where you just, they didn't want you to run out of gas, really. And so they gave you a lot of stuff to do with your mana up until like turn 10, turn 12. And that's kind of what a lot of these cards are doing too. So there's like a 2 mana 1/2 that gives you like a random piece of cardboard or whatever. And it's like, is that good? And the answer is like, kind of, yeah. You just don't run out of stuff to do. So then like this as a sweeper is not good, because it means that you're making it so your opponent never runs out of stuff to do. But they're probably in that situation anyway if you're in the alchemy queue, which is kind of where you need to be in order to cast this card, right? So how does that actually impact things?
Yeah, and it also plays well with the idea that you're going to be doing the same type of stuff, where eventually you're just going to amass this accumulation of resources and spew them onto the battlefield. And, some of my first stuff I've worked on has been like Omnath, Storm the Festival things. And I think everyone's got an eye on that archetype for sure. But that's a very illustrative thing of what potentially you are trying to achieve in this alchemy format. Just spew a bunch of things onto the table. And in that scenario, you don't need a hard sweeper, you need time. And Divine Purge does a great job of going wider than almost any 3 mana sweeper can potentially do, right? Like you are getting to the old growth trolls in the format, the bodies that are usually too big to be vulnerable to a 3 mana sweeper. We usually see
Adeline too.
Yeah, Adeline's a good example. We usually see Infest variants at 3 mana. Sometimes we see 3 damage stuff from red that does as broad a sweeper as possible. But this is hitting some very, very key 3 mana 4 toughness creatures. I think it's important for that role. Hitting artifacts isn't irrelevant. There's clue tokens and there's blood tokens, and getting both of those can matter a bunch. I think there's some cards actually in this set that play really well with blood tokens that we're going to talk about, and so I could see that becoming an important part of the equation as well for Divine Purge. So not a world beater here, and it's interesting that there's multiple sweepers in this set. There's Begin Anew in Selesnya. There's a red sweeper. This is the one, though, that kind of sparks my interest the most in terms of what it's capable of and how it changes the format. Those sweepers are kind of redundant with other options that already exist. This one's unique, though.
Right. And so the thing with this card is a thing that we're going to have to look at with a bunch of these cards, where it's just like, well, where does this fit? It doesn't go into any existing decks. And I think you need to realize that the format's going to look very different than standard. And this is not a big card pool, but even something as simple as like adding 2 alchemy cards to an already existing deck probably means that they have like so much more card advantage. And they're also just going to be playing like a bunch of random ass cards that they get from draft spell books and stuff like that, where they're just not going to run out of gas, and they're going to like look and function very differently than the standard variant would. So you're going to have to probably build a new deck to incorporate this card, but I think that we have the tools to do that. You just need to find a thing that is like go big, kind of go over the top of your opponent. You mentioned like Storm the Festival stuff, which wasn't super successful before, but I think that there are a lot of cards in this small set that give it a chance to do that. Plus, again, with the nerfs from everything else, it's like playing Storm the Festival into an Alrund's Epiphany metagame doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. But when you're trying to like basically just be the best mid-range deck or the best like go over the top of you deck, then that might be the thing to be doing.
Absolutely. So many of the cards we're going to talk about here just deal in raw cardboard. Like that's just going to be a recurring theme throughout this list. And this seems like the perfect sweeper for that scenario.
Number 8, Cursebound Witch, B, 1/2, creature, human, warlock. There are not a lot of wizards for party, man.
No.
This is a warlock.
Definitely the squeeze.
There were a lot of things too that were just warlocks instead of wizards. I was so mad. Catilda was one. It was a warlock. Like, are you kidding me? Anyway, when Cursebound Witch dies, draft a card from this thing's spell book. And how many cards is this? Are they all like 15 or something?
I believe they're all 15. Please don't quote me on that. Don't quote me on actually anything I say in this episode. It could all be wrong. I am willing to live with that consequence. But I do think it's 15 cards for every draft set, and then you get revealed 3 of them, correct?
Yeah.
And you choose one of those 3. And I don't think we have to hit like every option that's in all of these spell books, but there's good stuff in Cursebound Witch's spell book to the point where I think it's comparable to iTwitch, and in some cases will exceed it. There's some variance here to be sure. Like you could get a real dumpster draft and get blown up, but you could play this late game and end up with a cruel reality. And that's a ridiculous swing. Or you play it early game and set up Cauldron Familiar Witch's Oven in your standard deck, which we all know how that goes.
I mean, so if you get super lucky and hit each one, you know.
Yeah, no question. You have to get super lucky. I will point out, though, that these are real cards you get. So Cauldron Familiar will do the graveyard stuff. It's not a Cauldron Familiar token. It's a real Cauldron Familiar card. That matters a bunch. And there's also like scenarios too when you're doing iTwitch stuff where maybe you don't want to give up your sideboard for the lesson cards, or you just need redundancy. And there have been black decks I have worked on where if I could play a full 12 1-drops just to make sure I always have my draw 2 effects online, I would probably do so. And I think Cursebound Witch is going to be a really good player in that space.
Yeah, I think the selection from iTwitch, the fact that you get a choice, the fact that even if those cards are bad or you run out of them, you get to rummage. I think that all of that stuff is a little bit better. And 1/1 flyer is probably a little bit better than a 1/2 on the ground. But saving your sideboard slots, even if it's just like 3 sideboard slots, is huge. And I'm a big proponent of that. And I mean, if you're playing in best of 1, it probably doesn't matter all that much. But for best of 3, I can see it. I'm coming around to it. Because iTwitch was mostly just get a piece of random cardboard. And this is kind of doing the same thing. And sometimes it's like a really good piece of cardboard.
Can be.
Number 7, Angel of Unity. 1/dub, 1/3, creature, angel, cleric, flying lifelink. Whenever this enters the battlefield or you cast a party spell, choose a party creature in your hand. It perpetually gets +1/+1. Party card or spell is a cleric, rogue, warrior, or wizard. So just, I don't know, funny wording. Like, choose a party creature in your hand.
What is your favorite party creature, Gerald?
There's a new one that's really good. And I don't know. So my deck was like Jasper Sentinel, Archpriest of Iona, this 2-drop rogue that gives all your things in play die, make a clue. Had some other 2s, had Elite Spellbinder, had Grizzled Huntmaster, and then like Squad Commando, Tazri, Portable Hole. That was basically my deck.
Okay. My favorite party creature is...
This Angel is a 2-drop, yeah.
Yep. My favorite party creature is Slurms Mackenzie.
I don't know what that means.
Okay, that's fine. I know you don't. Somebody out there gets it, I hope.
Okay. Angel's pretty good. It means that instead of playing like the best things at rate on each part of your curve, you get a reason for actually trying to build around the party mechanic. And party has had some payoffs, but clearly they have proven to be not all that spectacular. But This card just means that all of your things are basically going to get +1/+1, or you could just build a really big something potentially.
Yeah, I think this is just what Party needed. Like you said, you're playing creatures that are just worse than the things that aren't reliant on Party whatsoever, but there weren't enough payoffs to really push you over the power edge you needed. So I'm still skeptical about Party. I sort of always have been. It's like I said, you haven't changed the paradigm where there exist all these really powerful things that you could just do instead, but we're bringing them closer now. We've certainly nerfed some of those outliers. So, Luminarch Aspirant comes to mind, which interestingly fits in
It was
parties
a party
as well.
card, yeah.
Yeah. But still, you get the point where you just didn't have to work that hard. You just had all these powerful creatures anyway. So Angel of Unity at least gives you a reason to explore the Party archetype again, and I am excited for that.
Number 6, Sanguine Brushstroke, 1 BB enchantment. When this enters the battlefield, create a blood token and conjure a card named Blood Artist onto the battlefield. Whenever you sacrifice a blood token, each opponent loses 1 and you gain 1.
I like this card a lot. I think it has the potential to be very good. And the cardboard output thing sort of kicked into overdrive with this card, right? You get the Sanguine Brushstroke itself, which is an enchantment that remains on the battlefield. You get a blood token and you get a Blood Artist. Again, a real Blood Artist card. So if it dies and you want to reanimate it, you have access to that. You can do it. Things like Agadeem's Awakening are going to bring back that Blood Artist, and that's important for archetypes like this. So just raw cardboard, this card is off the charts, but I'm really excited about this because I actually found an archetype somebody played in the Red Bull Untapped event this past weekend. And this is an actual standard, obviously, but it was sort of like red-black tokens built around I forget the first name on the card. Something Uprising from Stetsia Uprising, which is a sort of Bitter Blossom equivalent, but you can sacrifice it if you control exactly 13 permanents to 7 your opponent. And it also used a lot of the blood creatures to get up to that threshold of having enough permanents. And so it instilled all this reach, and it just produced this huge amount of blood tokens. And now those blood tokens are going to be part of your drain game. Plus you have all these bodies floating around to sacrifice, the humans that are being routinely made by these enchantments, which are triggering your Blood Artist, and all of that stuff mushed together is an exciting archetype that couldn't exist under Epiphany. It would just get completely outscaled. But if the games are smaller, I really like the potential some kind of setup like that has. And it's on the very top of my list of things to explore. So expect to see deck lists in that vein from me very soon.
Yeah, I could see it. It's weird. Like I get that the card like makes a Blood Artist and a blood token, but the Blood Artist doesn't like do anything with the blood tokens,
It has the name Blood on it.
I know, but I'm saying like the Sanguine Brushstroke is the thing like dinging them when the blood token dies, right? Not the Blood Artist.
That is true.
It doesn't make any sense. But whatever. Yeah, I think that those sorts of setups are generally pretty good against creature decks where, you just kind of like turtle up behind some pretty mediocre creatures, gain some card advantage, kill their stuff that matters. And then with this setup, at least you can just like eventually fireball your opponent out, which is cool. I'm definitely
in multiple
down with
ways too. I mean, that's that kind of flexibility is a big deal.
Yeah. Remember when we were building like the Plum the Forbidden decks and it was just like, oh, we need a way. Like we can draw cards all day, right? We just need a thing that can like burn our opponents out. And we tried whatever the crappy 3-mana enchantment was, Bastion of Remembrance.
That is correct.
Yeah, made a human and then was a Blood Artist. And it was just like so slow and so bad. And this is like such a better version of that. And you have the Stensia Uprising, which is a thing that like makes tokens and is a finisher. So this actually seems like it has potential. I'm down with that.
Yeah, and don't sleep on the card selection from blood tokens either. It's just consistently doing your thing is going to be worth a lot as well. So looking forward to building this deck for sure.
Fearsome Whelp, number 5. Scrolling to find our little dragon friend. 1R, 1/1, creature dragon, flying. At the beginning of your end step, each dragon card in your hand perpetually gains this spell, costs 1 less to cast. Watching a lot of streams today, I saw a lot of people messing around with dragons. It seemed like they were loving it.
I understand why. I think the output on this card is surprisingly huge. And it's very easy to see scenarios where this dies and still nets you 2 mana. And you think about your accelerant doing that, that's sort of cracked. And obviously its potential output can go way higher than that. It can bring multiple dragons down to a castable level. The curve works really well. There's a 4-drop dragon in this set in Town Razor Tyrant, which I think is pretty good. It's kind of just pure damage, a little bit of utility, but fills out your curve really nicely. We have Moonveil Regent out there as another 4-mana dragon. Of course, we still have Goldspan at 5. 6 mana is the big legendary dragon. So a lot of options going all the way up the curve. And if this thing stays on the battlefield for a couple turns, your hand just got real cheap. And it's redundant too, because there's other ways to accelerate in the dragon tribe where it's starting to feel like a real archetype, distinct from just, oh, these dragons are good cards, let me just play them alongside Alrund's Epiphany.
Yeah. Orb of Dragonkind is completely solid and might not have been worth playing when it was just like, I hope that I draw this thing because I have no other way to accelerate. Well, now you have 2 different 2-mana things that can accelerate. And you have Moonveil Regent, like you noted, and the other dragon in this set. So now you have like consistent turn 2, consistent turn 3 dragon. Your Dragon's Fires are presumably going to be awesome. You have
always on, yeah.
The 3-mana Red Sweeper if you want that. Maybe that just lives in your sideboard, whatever. But Town Razor Tyrant on turn 3, especially if you're on the play, like they're not going to be able to sacrifice their lands. You're right. It is just going to deal a bunch of damage, even if this thing gets removed. So you're still getting like a lot of value out of that. Chandra, Dress to Kill, also look pretty nice in this deck.
Yeah, these creatures do a lot of things where they just like they matter even if they die. And those kind of scenarios are really, really clutch in the current world of Magic. It sort of flies in the face of what the rest of the set is doing. Like they're not as card advantage heavy, but there's got to be a way to punish that, right? And I think having this kind of pure mana acceleration into just big beaters is a really nice way to keep that in check. And I have a feeling a lot of decks are going to play very soft to these dragon setups in the early days of this format.
I believe that too. Number 4, Rahilda, Wanted Cutthroat, 1R, 2/2, legendary creature, human werewolf, first strike. When this deals combat damage to a player, exile a non-land card from their library at random. During any turn you attacked with a wolf or werewolf, you may cast that card and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast that spell. It has Daybound and a backside. Backside is 2/2 double strike and maybe the same ability. Yeah, it looks like the same ability.
Yeah, but it's interesting in that the double strike
hits him twice.
Yeah. Hits him twice. Yeah, so you'll get 2 cards from your opponent's deck. I think this is maybe the last piece. Well, there's two pieces here. The werewolf decks really just didn't justify themselves when there was mono green, mono white, and for multiple reasons that had to do with the broader context of the format. But they were so close. They really only needed one little push, and I could see Rahilda being that push. It plays so well with the tribal synergies. It is going to take advantage of anything you're doing that is like wolf power and toughness base. So things like Torvald pumping them up will matter a bunch. Getting extra draws will matter a bunch. All of these things are just really, really tight with those werewolf synergies. And I have to mention another card, which is, it seems kind of lame. Tenacious Pup is out there, though. It's another card in this set. That's G, creature wolf. When Tenacious Pup enters the battlefield, you gain 1 life. When you cast your next creature spell, that creature enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter, trample counter, and vigilance counter on it. So you drop that counter onto so many of the werewolves, but in particular Rahilda. That's going to play really well as the game goes on. And then you have this vigilant, trampling, double striking thing when you finally do your transformation. That seems really, really strong for me, and a reason to justify the werewolf tribe being something separate from just good green cards, good red cards, mush them together, see what happens.
I like Blood Rage Alpha a lot too.
Blood Rage Alpha also seems strong. You want to read that one?
Yeah, 3R, 4/3 wolf. When this enters the battlefield, choose 1. Another target wolf or werewolf you control fights another target creature. Another target wolf or werewolf you control fights target creature you don't control. Second one is when you cast your next wolf or werewolf spell, it gains when this creature enters the battlefield, it fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. So either you fight with something immediately, or maybe you don't have anything on the battlefield, or you have just small stuff on the battlefield, but a big thing in your hand, you can set up the fight for next turn.
Yeah, and this plays really well, obviously, with the werewolf decks that look to go very high up the curve, use some of the mana generating stuff that the werewolf tribe can do. So not only do I think werewolves sort of got unlocked, I think they got unlocked at multiple sizes too, which is pretty exciting.
Well, let's talk about the sizing thing, because so like Angel of Unity, for example, right, where you get to give something in your hand +1/+1, presumably a lot, right? You're playing a bunch of party stuff. Yep. Or even like Tenacious Pup setting up for 3/3 Rahilda or 4/4 Werewolf Pack Leader or something. Like how much impact does that actually have? Because I think it's pretty huge.
I think so too. I mean, certainly you can react to things like that, and it changes the cards that matter. Again, we can go back to Divine Purge at the start of this list, and why like being able to just exile based on mana value is becoming more important rather than relying on sweepers to do so, because it's your damage based removal isn't going to have the same level of consistency. Like previously you go, okay, I have Dragon's Fire in my deck, so they play Goldspan Dragon and I'm going to Dragon's Fire it. I know that it's going to happen every single time this comes up, but that's gotten less certain with a lot of these effects that we have present, and you can't really rely on damage based removal the same way you could previously. So I think all the non-damage based removal certainly goes up a notch for me, and this effect is sure to be impactful and just change a bunch of matchups, I think.
Yeah, I think it's, night and day completely when you get to play like a 4/4 against the Adeline deck instead of a 3/3, right? It's just so much different.
Yeah, breakpoints mean so much less now, and if you can play around them, you'll be advantaged for it.
And how brutal Old Growth Troll is as a 4/4 when now maybe it's just getting outclassed by some stuff.
It's possible. Or maybe it's getting larger itself and now is battling as a 5/5, and now your Dragon's Fire doesn't work anymore.
Yeah.
All these things are possible.
Number 3, Clone Crafter. 1/1, 1/2. When this enters the battlefield, conjure a duplicate of a random creature card from your opponent's library into your hand. It perpetually gains. You may spend mana as though or mana of any color to cast a spell. Man, Hearthstone does this so much better, right? Where it's just like, get a random creature from your opponent's deck.
Yeah, go to town.
It's just like the text is so much simpler. But anyway, 2 mana 1/2 draws you a random piece of cardboard. How good is that? What sort of deck does this fit into? I think it's pretty easy to look at this just like an Elvish Visionary, but it's a lot better than that, I think.
Super powered Elvish Visionary. My first sort of home for this card was more sideboard based. I could see a bunch of matchups where like just sheer quantity of, say, Goldspan Dragons in the, is it Dragon's Mirror could matter a bunch, or just spots where like your opponent only has a few key threats, something like Hullbreaker Horror comes to mind, and you just always have a Hullbreaker Horror. That sounds really good in some scenarios, but I sort of think it's better than that, because you don't actually remove the card from your opponent's deck, so you can just use this to generate tons of value if that's the setup you want to do, and just get loaded up with cards in hand. And like you mentioned, like blinking an Elvish Visionary is pretty good. You don't really mind doing that, but blinking a card that just always gets a threat, that becomes a very different scenario very quickly. So I like recursive setups with this. I like just sideboard value setups. I'm a little concerned that there isn't a deck that wants this right now. But like we said, we have to work around that. These cards are powerful enough to justify creating new archetypes, creating new decks. I think Clone Crafter can certainly do that.
I think you just put it into decks. I think that's just how simple it is. Like,
just let it exist.
Yeah. I mean, if you are a deck that wants a 2-drop, this is a very, very fine 2-drop, because either like you said, your opponent's playing like light on creatures where their creatures are very impactful. I mean, sometimes maybe you're playing this in a creature deck and you get a Smoldering Egg or something, and it's like, well, what the hell am I doing with this? But a lot of the time it's like, well, you're just getting like a 3 mana 3/3 or something, and then that means that also like helps fill out your mana curve, gives you an extra piece of cardboard. There are some potential ways to like discard for value. There are ways to blink things for value. Like, there's just a lot of ways to actually utilize this and getting an extra card that I think just gets undervalued.
Again, pure cardboard, good cardboard. I wouldn't sleep on that.
Number 2, Inquisitor Captain. This was the reason I built a party deck, and this card is so much better than just going in a party deck. This card goes everywhere. This is 3 dub For a 3/3 human cleric vigilance, when this enters the battlefield, if there are 20 or more creature cards with mana value 3 or less among cards in your graveyard, hand, and library, seek 2 creature cards with mana value 3 or less, put one onto the battlefield, shuffle the other into your library. So this is Collected Company that never misses, always gets a 3/3 vigilance. All it asks you to do is basically have 20 or more creatures with mana value 3 or less in your starting deck. Obviously, like, it doesn't count exile, so maybe you could run afoul of like some graveyard hate, and this thing would not trigger at some point in the game or whatever. But for the most part, like, that's all it really asks of you, and that's pretty small. So between this and Clone Crafter, like, stuff like Teleportation Circle doesn't seem that outlandish to me, and they just outvalue you. That's all they do. They just eventually, like, they use their crappy bodies to trade off with yours and will eventually swarm you with 1/2s and 3/3s.
Every card is worth 2 in Alchemy. That's really the alchemist trick here, is you just make something out of nothing over and over.
That's not how Alchemy works, man. It's supposed to be equivalent exchange.
Nope. Now we just make stuff. It all comes from somewhere. We'll sort it out on the back end. To give up an arm and a leg, and you end up with all the stuff you need. So I think you did a great job explaining Inquisitor Captain. I was lower on this card than you, but as soon as you put it into appropriate context, I came around. I think also the types on this card are really impactful, particularly clerics. Clerics are really close, and there's good clerics in this set. If you work out that puzzle, and again, clerics are close in a way where they could have never competed under Alrund's Epiphany because they just got outscaled. They were like a value type deck. I've even had good Pyre of Heroes clerics deck, which I believe in. They were good enough, if not for this thing that loomed over the format. Now, there'll be a new thing that looms over the format, a new way to go large, but it's possible you'll be able to interact with it and play through it, especially when you're generating so much value from cards like Inquisitor Captain. So all of the setup this card asks you to do, it's not that much. It's very easy to just play this card and be happy with it, and then get to town blinking it, or, you know, whatever kind of tricks you want to get up to. This is going to pay you over and over and over, and I expect this will be a very impactful card. Think about the removal that's tied to this card. Like, we have both Skyclave Apparition and Brutal Cathar available in these decks, and if that doesn't matter, I will be extremely shocked. This card should spawn archetypes. It should go in a bunch of archetypes. Should be very strong.
The thing with the Clerics deck too is it played a bunch of crappy creatures that just eventually, like, they never ran out of gas, right? So they just eventually swarmed you with the nonsense that they had. And that was the selling point for Clerics. And now all the decks basically get to do that.
Yeah. So who does it better becomes the question.
That is the question. I do think that it starts with Inquisitor Captain. That seems pretty obvious to me, because this is just like one of the biggest rate cards that you could ask for in this set. It's so good, for example, that I think that this could replace or even just like add to Collected Company in the Historic Humans deck.
Interesting. So just having the humans type on it, and I mean, it's a big difference not to play at instant speed, though. Don't you think that's a lot of the appeal of Collected Company in that deck?
Yes and no, because you're also not getting affected by like your own Thalia, for example. You also get to be,
that's true.
You get to be monocolor, or perhaps
have Thalia in this format, by the way. So there you go. That's a good selling point.
You get to be monocolor. You could play Faceless Haven, which admittedly is only a 3/3 now in Historic. But you could also just like play a different splash color if you wanted to. Like if you wanted to play General Kudro and then maybe play some Thoughtseizes alongside your Thalias or whatever, you could do that. You could have, Fatal Push type stuff, whatever you want to do.
Interesting. And like you said, one of the biggest things is getting access to these spells. You don't have to have that ridiculous creature count just to still miss anyway and hate your life with Collected Company. Now you get a little bit more certainty. I don't know, how many creatures are you going to put in your deck so you don't run afoul of the exiling thing? Because exile-based removal can hit you up too.
Yeah, you get like Flame Blessed Bolted or whatever.
Yeah.
So you want at least 20 plus 4 of these, right? And then maybe you want like a couple extra, and then you play like 24 land or something. It still gives you like a lot of spell slots to work with if you wanted to do that.
Yeah.
And I think for the most part, these decks are still going to want to play a very healthy mana curve. So they're still probably going to play, more than just the base 22 or whatever. But, if you wanted to, for example, maximize your chances of hitting only Skyclave Apparition or Brutal Cathar alongside of this, you could try and work towards doing that too.
Yeah, the 3s are so good in particular. It makes a card like this shine even more when there's a reason to really stack your deck up with 3s.
Yeah. So I don't know, man. This card is just good. I think it's going to show up in a lot of spots. It's definitely going to influence how people build their decks and what types of decks that they're building. And I think a lot of Alchemy is going to be like, okay, well, how do we beat Inquisitor Captain piles where they're just, card advantage based around this card.
Mm-hmm.
Number 1 card. I read this card and then was like, okay, I could see how it's like pretty decent, maybe. And then you get to the spell book on this thing,
and things just go crazy.
Dear Lord. Key to the Archive, 4 mana artifact. This enters the battlefield tapped. When this enters the battlefield, draft a card from Key to the Archive spellbook, then discard a card, and you can tap to add 2 mana in any combination of colors. And this is the spellbook that I'm actually going to read.
Go for it.
Approach the Second Sun.
Can't believe that's there. Keep going.
It, again, creates a physical card, so this does get shuffled into your library, whatever. Also, the thing curves pretty well into Approach. Day of Judgment, pretty solid. Time Warp, pretty busted when you're accelerating, doing some wild stuff. Counterspell, Demonic Tutor, Doomblade, Lightning Bolt, Regrowth, Despark, Electrolyze, Growth Spiral, Lightning Helix, Putrefy, and then Corrosive Grip and Claim the Firstborn. And I think honestly, the worst pile you can get is Corrosive Grip, Claim the Firstborn, and Growth Spiral. And then you still just pick Growth Spiral and be happy with it. But also, even if it gives you 3 spot removal cards against a creatureless control deck, you can just discard that card to the thing.
You can. Always an option, and you're jumping very, very high up the curve. And the fact that there's just a game-winning option, curving into Approach of the Second Sun is going to end most games, I think. You have to be in a pretty bad spot for it not to work. But I played this card a bit today. It was one of the few cards I got games in with. There were no bad outcomes. I was just always happy with what this did. And I got a Lightning Helix in a really key spot. That was great. I had a D-Spark, which was relevant. You almost always get something that's going to do the job for you. And the fact that it's tied to something that's letting you go from 4 to 7 and fixing your mana is unlocking a lot of the stuff that we've talked about. Things like Storm the Festival endgames, things like Omnath, which I'm not quite convinced that new Omnath is all that playable. I think there is a problem with the card and a problem with just having enough raw cardboard to make it work without the draw trigger. It's more the absence of the draw trigger than the increased mana. I think you could live with the increased mana, but missing the draw trigger is a little much.
I would honestly be fine if Omnath was just 5 mana and was the same. And I mean fine where it's oh, this card is probably still busted. So maybe I'm not fine with it, but
No, I think they did the right thing by going harder on it, and that may limit the card. But regardless, there's plenty of endgames to go to with Key to the Archive, and it's just going to do such a good job getting you to those mana thresholds and stabilizing. So many of these cards are good at stabilizing. Day of Judgment, the removal spells, it just gets you to a safe place where you're able to do that really big endgame thing. I feel like this is the card that should shape the format the most going forward coming out of this Alchemy set.
All the spell books are just here's a ham sandwich. And then I looked at this one and I just started laughing, dude. I was like, this is awesome.
Turned it up for this spell book for sure.
Yeah. And this is a card where it's explosive vegetation, double mana rock kind of thing. Those historically have been very playable, right?
Yep.
And then it also just gives you access to a busted spell book. And then
discard Outlet. I mean, that's kind of thin, but it can matter.
You have Teferi, who slows the sunset, which is pretty nice with this card also. You're ramping into a Hullbreaker horror potentially. I was just this card is dope as hell. This is gonna be maybe the most played card in the set.
That's my guess as well. I think the card is excellent. I think it's pretty fun. I hate that they included Approach of the Second Sun because that feels like the lottery, and any we talk about opening up space for mid-range. Any mid-range deck that is against Key to the Archive deck that spikes Approach of the Second Sun, probably a wrap. There's not really a whole bunch you're going to be able to do through that.
Just Grizzled Huntmaster for a Masked Vandal and blow
you already figured it out.
Blow up their artifact.
There you go.
And then they can never cast
That's
it.
why Grizzled Huntmaster was in the set. There was a reason all along. You figured it out.
Clearly.
Grizzled Huntmaster controlling Key to the Archive. You heard it here first.
Masked Vandal, best wizard in the party archetype. Tajuru Preserver might be slightly better, I suppose. But
Yeah, tough times for the wizards out there.
I know, man.
In more ways than one.
Yeah. But yeah, I think Key to the Archive is super fun, super cool. And this is the type of thing that you need in a set like this. I was expecting more stuff like this, honestly. But the stuff that we got also seems pretty fine. It just doesn't like read as exciting.
Yeah, I would say some growing pains with the whole idea, the execution of what's going on here. But the end result is something that I'm pretty into. I'm excited to spend some time building decks. We'll see how the gameplay goes. That's something you can't really get a sense of until you're in it. I think a lot of that is going to depend on the polls of the format. I am curious, like, what kind of limitations these dragons decks set on people, how good like the werewolf beatdown stuff is on the low end, how good just things like mono green picking up 1 or 2 cards or mono white picking up 1 or 2 cards. You know, those have to be sussed out a little bit. And once we've identified those polls, we'll see what's going on in the middle space, which is where I think the game of Magic really like lives and dies. If the middle games are on point and you have tension and, you know, I'm a little concerned about the resource thing. I think running out of resources in a game of Magic is good. And this set seems to be designed entirely in opposition to that principle. I get it. I understand that like people don't like, you know, missing their land drops and not casting spells. And that's something that Magic has fought against for a long time, but has held steadfastly on, and correctly so, that it's the thing that makes the game great. And you always want to play with it a little bit. You want to move the needle left and right and see where you can find a sweet spot for people to feel like they have agency, but also not just let play skill dictate every game. We'll see how Alchemy fares on that scale.
I want the games to be moving towards a conclusion, which this set kind of fights against. And I also want the draw steps to be dynamic and just matter. Mm-hmm. And when you already have a bunch of resources, it matters less and less. So
that is true.
I think those are 2 big things that this might miss on. And I certainly don't want there to be like, you know, 30-minute game ones or whatever.
Yep. Oh, we're going to see. We're going to see what this offers. And, you know, we talk about the need for games to end, but in a fashion that makes sense, where they come to logical conclusions. We hated Epiphany for that reason. It didn't feel like it made sense.
Yeah, logical conclusion is what I'm in favor of. Definitely.
Yep.
Not Epiphany, not Approach.
Yep. Where do you see Hullbreaker Horror in this format? I mean, it's kind of like, you know, we did a whole show saying it was the only thing that matters. I think we overstated it, but there was something there. There was a principle there that like this was the next thing up, and we just overstated how much it was able to directly influence the Epiphany matchups. I think. But if not for Epiphany, it would have been the most important card.
It did matter, and it certainly like influenced where the format went and how people built their decks and stuff like that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It just didn't take over.
I think it did. It was probably like the week before the PT, though.
Okay, maybe that's fair. But like, did you actually take over if you then cede control very quickly after that?
Yeah. I mean, like,
just a brief coup.
Just a little extra coup.
A little insurgency, real quick.
Yeah. I mean, I think it matters. Like, there has to be a thing that like warps the format that then dictates how people have to like alter their decks and game plans and whatnot in order to get the format to shift. I think that that's mostly just a constant, right? Mm. I do think that sort of effect, if given enough time, is exactly the type of thing that can beat, well, my opponent has, you know, infinite 3-mana 3/3s or whatever, yes. Right? Like they just have like all this gas and doesn't matter. Well, it's like Hullbreaker Horror is the kind of thing that can actually beat that and like storm the festival into a bunch of Omnaths and Felidar retreats and Key to the Archives and stuff, like these things that like go big and go over the top. Like those things do matter. So I think that Hullbreaker Horror could matter, but it is also like a pretty slow, ponderous card. And if you can't do enough like divine purges or Shadow's Verdict type of things to like buy you time, you could just get run over. I think that's perfectly plausible too.
Be interesting to see. I'm looking forward to getting in the queues, which is all I can ask for. I'm happy to have a reason to play some games of Magic.
I'm pretty sure that I am going to sit this one out.
Just no queues? That's it? You're done?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to like watch streams and keep up on the format and everything, but I don't think that this deserves my wild cards. I'm just going to opt out. We'll see. Maybe a deck shows up where I'm like, oh, I just have to play this, right? But I am not getting a sense of like, oh, this is like so much better to be doing than standard or modern or whatever. It's like if I want to play Magic, I can just hang out in the places that I normally do. And obviously there's going to be another iteration of this with the next set, but then we're also just going to have like a next set for standard. So
right.
I don't know. Like it's going to take a lot to pull me in if it's like not necessary that I physically play myself, but I'm certainly going to keep up for content and everything.
Well, I hope that I feel strongly enough about it that I come back next week and try and make a case to drag you in. That's my sincere wish. It's like I want to feel that strongly about it that it becomes can't miss.
If you ever feel like you're going to play like for 2 or 3 hours, let me know and I'll bird,
2 to 3 hours. I mean, I'm an old man, Gerald. I don't have that kind of stamina in me anymore. Like I can get a toilet game in here, maybe like a bedtime game in there, but a 2 or 3 hour session that's intense.
Okay, well, I don't think it's really worth either of our time for you to like call me in to bird the one game of Magic you're going to play,
Call you into the toilet with me while I'm playing that one game? Okay. I will not do that if that's not what you're interested in.
I don't know. I mean, we'll see how it goes, I guess. Okay. I would hope that you play non-toilet games of Magic, but who knows?
From time to time, I dabble.
Game.
Good luck.